Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, November 10th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 2 days, the game against Michigan in 16 days. Once we get into the heart of the season, we end up not talking about recruiting nearly as much on this show as we do during the offseason, but today I have two pieces of good news for you on that front. One is that we're talking recruiting today with Marc Givler, and two is that Marc has a brand new podcast that's going to be focused on recruiting, so you can always get new information on Buckeye recruiting there, even if we're not covering it here. So that podcast is called the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast. Marc, let people know what they can expect from that show.
Yeah, I've been doing the Skull Session Recruiting column for probably more than a dozen years now, and it's always kind of a way for me to consolidate all the recruiting information that's happening right now, and we're going to kind of bring that to a podcast form. I would obviously recommend everyone sign up for the site at BuckeyeHuddle.com, and my written message board posts are always going to have more to them than the podcast in terms of inside information, things like that. But we're going to bring some of that out to the podcast format. I'm also going to have some guests on. We're going to have kind of a rotating panel with me. We'll have Alex Gleitman on. We'll have Kevin Noon on, but we'll have high school coaches, recruits, different people on the podcast that I think people would be interested to hear from. And then we'll go from there. And like I said, if like I mentioned on the show the other day, if people want to have certain guests or there's certain types of content they want to have on the podcast, I'm all ears to that as well. So just kind of a way to bring the written Skull Session column into audio video format.
All right, yeah, and like Marc said, and just like these shows, we end up talking some recruiting. There's a lot more recruiting talk at BuckeyeHuddle.com on our huddle board, which is members only. So if you find yourself at the end of these shows saying, I wish I had heard more, I wish I knew this question about this guy, it's on the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com, but you got to sign up to become a member. And, while you're thinking about it right now, go ahead and just take a minute to subscribe to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast right now. We can wait. Just search Skull Session on your podcast platform of choice. It should pop up. Again, the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast. It is on the Buckeye Huddle Podcast Network. So if you search Buckeye Huddle, it should come up there as well. But go ahead and subscribe to that. That should be a really fun show. And you mentioned you had Kevin on for the first one, but yeah, those are you have a bunch of really good folks to have on those shows. So there should be fun conversations. Okay, so now on to today's show. Marc has been very busy as we head into the home stretch of the 2023 cycle. Early signing day is just over a month away, and it's starting to feel like there may be, is there a little more drama on the way before all is said and done, Marc? Are things maybe a little less settled than they would be typically at this part of the cycle? And if so, why?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're pretty settled at a lot of positions, but this defensive line group continues to be interesting, and really the entire defense to an extent. Look, they're still trying to get these 3 5-star defensive ends. You got Keon Keeley, you got Damon Wilson, Mateo Uiagalelei. All those guys are still up for grabs. They're uncommitted, and so there's going to be a lot of maneuvering here the next month or so as these recruiting battles play out. You've also got Caleb Downs, 5-star safety, number 1 safety in the country, committed to Alabama. That's another guy Ohio State has not given up on. And they continue to look, at possible options in the secondary, possible options at linebacker. And so there's a chance here, and the coaching carousel has not yet really begun to spin too fast. And once that happens, we may see some other names pop up. So it's always a fun time here, the last 5 or 6 weeks leading into that early signing period.
All right. So you mentioned 4 5-star guys, or very close to 5-star guys there that they're still pursuing on defense. And we're going to talk about 2 of them here. Again, you can find more on the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But the first one of those guys I wanted to ask you about was Damon Wilson. This is someone that you went down and saw in person, watched him play just a month or 2 ago. He is a top 30 edge rusher out of Florida. He just made another visit to Georgia. Now, that was not something that the Buckeyes were probably thrilled to see, but not necessarily a death blow to their chances to land him either. So where do things stand with Damon Wilson coming out of that visit?
It's been an interesting cycle that we go through covering Damon Wilson's recruitment. He visits Ohio State, and then things look good for Ohio State, and then it's, the sooner this ends, the better it is for Ohio State, and then he'll visit Georgia, and then it's, the Georgia visit went great. The sooner this ends, the better it is for Georgia. And then Ohio State's coaches go down to the high school, and the sooner this ends, the better it is for Ohio State now. And so we're in this just constant cycle of back and forth between these two schools. And now Georgia got the opportunity now. And so now you hear, if this ends this week or the next week, it's good for Georgia. And now Ohio State's countering, and they're trying to get him back up to campus for the Michigan game at the end of the month. And that's looking like a very real possibility at this point. And so that's where things are right now, is Ohio State is hoping that, he did this extra unofficial to Georgia, and now they're hoping to get that extra unofficial for the Michigan game. And if they do, you have to like their chances. I kind of like their chances anyway, but if they get this visit back up for Michigan game, that's another opportunity. But this was supposed to be over, I think, end of September initially, and the more this plays out, the more I think we are heading toward possible in-home visits in December. I think that's very possible at this point. And so Ohio State's gonna, they've been fighting this battle a long time, so you just keep fighting it, and the relationship there with Larry Johnson's very good. And the one thing that continues to get pounded home to Damon Wilson is that Ohio State's got this new jack position where they're trying to stand up these edge rushers, and they don't really have a lot of guys that fit Damon Wilson's physical profile. So that's another thing they've got going for them, and just kind of keep hammering away at that for now.
Those horse race recruitments where, whoever had the last visit is, jumps back into the lead, or those are always really fun. They're like the football games where, the team who has the ball last is going to win, and it's going to be 56-49, but you don't know who.
Don't score too soon at the end of the fourth quarter. Don't leave enough time.
Don't score too soon. I say they're fun. I'm not sure Mark Pantoni and his staff think they're fun, but I think they're fun to watch and fun to follow. There's an offensive lineman like 7-8 years ago who it was like every time he visited a campus, that would be his new leader. I think he ended up at Arkansas, but Ohio State was in that mix. Jermaine Illuminor or something like that. But those are always really really fun recruitments to follow. And you mentioned that getting Wilson on campus for Georgia is probably not a good thing for Ohio State. The other 5-star guy I wanted to talk to you about out of the 4 you mentioned was Caleb Downs, because he also visited Georgia over the weekend. But actually, the fact that Caleb Downs visited Georgia is actually potentially good news for the Buckeyes. So can you please explain to people why Ohio State would be potentially kind of happy to see Caleb Downs visiting Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State was probably runner-up to Alabama when Caleb Downs committed over the summer. And I think at the time there were obviously some questions about the Ohio State defense. We hadn't seen anything out of Jim Knowles yet. And, Alabama's kind of proven track record there was good enough for Caleb Downs. Since that point, Ohio State has continually worked to get him back to campus, and the hope has been that he would eventually visit. And I know the date has been circled for a long time that, if they can get him up for the Michigan game, and we'll see if that happens. I know he's considering it. I know Ohio State's still pushing for that to happen. But he hadn't visited for a campus. I think he was at the Georgia-Clemson game as like a neutral observer at the beginning of the season, but he had not made a college campus visit since his commitment to Alabama, other than to Alabama. And so this opens the door, I think, that, okay, he's taken that plunge of he's now making visits. And one would argue that Alabama would be more upset with him visiting Georgia than visiting Ohio State, even though, Georgia's kind of right around the corner from him. That's a much bigger rival of Alabama's. It's their biggest recruiting rival. It's their biggest conference rival at this point. So if he's willing to do that, it sure looks like he's willing to kind of weigh some options here down the stretch, and maybe that bodes well for Ohio State trying to get him on campus. Obviously, they have 2 opportunities before the end of the season. One of them is this weekend. I haven't heard anything that would lead me to believe that's going to happen, but we'll see. I mean, he could just show up. That may not be something that he necessarily wants to broadcast. And then the other one is then at the end of the month, and I know there's some talk he would be at Alabama for the Iron Bowl, and that's certainly possible as well. But I know Ohio State's still working on that and trying to make that happen, and they get the visit and not Alabama. From there, it's like, okay, now if you can get him on campus for a game, can you get it? In-home visit in December? Can you get the Downs family together and get your coaches down there? And will they allow that to happen? And you can sit there and Urban Meyer and Ryan Day have been very good. The last two coaches, they've been very good at the in-home visit. So that's kind of the next step. But I think it would be telling if he showed up for the Michigan game. I really do.
Well, and with Michigan, if you're looking at just which game is the more interesting game this year, which game is the more compelling game this year, Ohio State and Michigan are potentially playing for a college football playoff spot. They could both end up in the college football playoff. The Iron Bowl this year, the Iron Bowl, in a lot of years, the Iron Bowl can be a fun, crazy game. This is maybe the lowest stakes Iron Bowl we've seen in, I don't know, a decade. Alabama's basically out of the national championship race. Auburn's already fired their head coach. So, you could see a plausible case for, that's going to be a more interesting game. So you go up there and watch the more interesting game, and that opens the door. But yeah, this feels very much like one of those classic. If they get them on campus, they have a puncher's chance. But until that happens, kind of monitor it, but don't assume anything. But certainly the Georgia visit does feel like it at least opens the door to the potential campus visit, which then opens the door to a potential in-home and a potential commitment. So, something to keep an eye on. Nothing's on that's on red alert right now, but there may be further developments in that story as we follow it. But a more of an opportunity there for Ohio State than we would have thought 2 weeks ago. Those are the two guys in the 23 class I wanted to talk to you about. But you also went and saw one of Ohio State's really a very, very high profile target for Ohio State for 2024. That's wide receiver Tyseer Denmark. He's out of the Philadelphia area. You actually got a chance to see him play as well. He's someone who looked really good at camp over the summer, but that was 7-on-7, so you never know how that's going to translate to the field. He's someone who sounds like he's maybe close to a decision. So what did you get out of watching him play in a real life football game and not just 7-on-7? And then what did you learn talking to him?
Yeah, he's very dynamic. He's, I kind of asked for a comp for him for Ohio State, and I just don't know. He's got a little bit of Jackson Smith and Jigba in terms of his quickness and ability to separate, and he's probably not, a 4-3 guy, so it kind of fits a little bit with kind of what Jackson has brought. But he's also got a little bit of Curtis Samuel in him. He lines up in the backfield, wildcat at times. Takes handoffs, jet sweeps, things like that. Can play in the slot. I think he will play in the slot. I think that's going to be his future position. But can also line up outside. But again, he's just a really impressive route runner. He's got great feet. He's got great hands and ball skills. And just a great feel for the game. He had 2 touchdowns on Saturday. They won the Philadelphia Catholic League Championship for the first time in 15 years there at Roman Catholic. So he had a touchdown on the ground. He had a 52-yard touchdown reception where he took a bubble screen and kind of weaved his way through traffic. So he's a guy that kind of fits the profile, I think, of what they've liked out of that slot position. And I know they're trying very hard to get him, and he's got a November 24th decision date. And I've liked where Ohio State stood with him since the summer when we saw him at 7-on-7 camp, and he was really gushing about the Ohio State program. And I got a chance to talk to him after the game, and he's obviously at this point, he's got this decision date set. He's not going to tell me where he's going. He's not going to tip his hand at this point, but he couldn't help but kind of gush about Brian Hartline. And also, another factor here for Ohio State is, Marvin Harrison Jr., also a Philly guy. Tyseer Denmark has been watching Marvin Harrison Jr. in the stardom that has kind of come with him here this year, and so there's a lot of proof of performance there for Ohio State. They've done a great job recruiting him, and I think they're in really good shape here heading into his decision in a few weeks.
Well, if you enjoyed that, you will definitely enjoy Marc's Skull Session recruiting podcast. Make sure, again, we talked about it off the top of the show. Make sure you are subscribed. You'll find that on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. Should be available in all of those places. Subscribe there, and also subscribe to BuckeyeHuddle.com, because, as I said, we talked. Marc mentioned 4 5-star guys, or close to 5-star guys. They are still pursuing in the 2023 class. We talked about 2 of them here. Well, guess what? You can find lots of stuff about the other 2 on the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up today. Again, we talk about give it a try for 30 days. The 30 days, your 30 days, if you start now, is going to include the Michigan game, the potential Big Ten championship game, college football playoff selection period, the start of the bowl prep. And then if you go through that 30 days and you're like, You know what? It turns out I enjoy this. It turns out I'm interested in Ohio State football and would like to learn more about it for the next 12 months. Wouldn't that be a great Christmas present? Don't have someone get you socks or underwear or whatever. Ask them to get you an annual membership to BuckeyeHuddle.com. Fantastic gift for you and yours. Solve everyone's Christmas problems. Make yourself happy at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.